Hi, good morning, everyone. Norman, I think we could probably get started. If anyone else joins after this, I think it should be fine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tiffany. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to this CASA webinar. Today, we're going to discuss the state of the South African infrastructure. Infrastructure is one of the great economic enablers of any country, both the creation and maintenance of infrastructure. And it's probably apt that we're looking at it right now, just before the general elections towards the end of May, when all the parties have promised to spend billions of rands on infrastructure, creating employment, etc., etc. And I'm very pleased that this morning we have Stephen Kaplan, who's going to talk to us about the SAICE infrastructure report card. And just by way of brief background, Stephen is a graduate of the University of Cape Town with a BSc Honours in Civil Engineering. His career spans 45 years, starting out with detailed civil infrastructure design and structural design of buildings and bridges, during which time he built up extensive experience working on numerous multidiscipline and infrastructure projects, with particular focus on the construction and project management sector. Stephen joined the SAICE team, that's the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, as the Chief Operating Officer in April 2013. He took over as the acting CEO from September 2018 to March 2020. Stephen was appointed onto the SAICE Council for the 2022 and 2023 years. And in April 22, he was appointed as the president-elect and then inaugurated as president in 2023. The unique focus of Stephen's service to SAICE in 2021 and 22 was as a project leader coordinating the technical infrastructure researches, the collation of data, and the drafting of the context leading up to the publication of the fourth SAICE Infrastructure Report Card, IRC, in November 2022. So I'm sure you'll agree we have a person that's more than well qualified to discuss the state of our infrastructure. So Stephen, with any further ado, I'd like to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to pull up my slides. Hang on a second. And then hopefully you'll still see me sort of on the side of it. Let me just have a go. Share. You seeing that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. And then I'm going to just put it into presentation mode. Okay, so you've seen that in presentation mode. Let me get back to the beginning. All right. Okay. So yeah, this presentation is an overview of the SAICE infrastructure report card, in 2022, and really it's for me to just wish you all a good morning and thank you for taking the time to listen to me on the topic that actually was the focus of my service, to SAICE for actually well over a year. And firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Norman Milne for inviting me here as the guest speaker, and also to MDA for hosting the event. And secondly, I have to say that this is the first time that I'm speaking to an audience of construction adjudicators. I'm not sure if I'm comforted by that fact. So we'll see how your questions and answers go at the end. If they're tough, then I know you are listening. So let me get started. Have you noticed, though, how interesting it is that we haven't had any load shedding now for the last, I don't know, 2 weeks? It's amazing how when elections come up, there's a general push to basically work those turbines to destruction and burn a lot of diesel generators. So it goes to show you what emphasis the government put on electricity supply as a tool for winning votes. But the problem is, of course, is it's not sustainable, and I'm just waiting for the big crash when all the turbines and generators fail because they've been working much harder and longer than they should have been. But anyway, as Norman mentioned, the first IRC was published in 2006, and it examined and commented on the current condition of public infrastructure. And since then, we have published a further 3 IRCs in 2011, 2017, and now this latest one in November 2022. And the basis of the research and the grading systems, which I'll talk about later, is the same grading and system used by the United States and the United Kingdom and 4 or 5 countries in Africa who are doing report cards under our guidance. So it's possible to make a comparison of the conditions of infrastructure between countries. I often get, well, how does South Africa's roads compare to Nigeria's roads, as an example? So Nigeria, if they've given it an overall rural roads a grade B, and we've given it a grade C, then one would assume that the rural roads in Nigeria are in a somewhat better condition than ours. But we'll get to that. But the point is that they're using exactly the same grades and exactly the same methodology. So it is reasonable to make that kind of comparison. You can download the IRC 2022 from the SAICE website using that link that you see on the bottom of the page. Does my mouse work? Can you see the mouse? Yes. Okay. So that link over there. Or alternatively, if you go into the website and you select the services tab, and then when you're on the services tab, you select the publications tab, and then you'll see a link to download it. It's the same link, and it's an open document. Please, I want all of you to realize that it's an open document. It's not protected in any way. And it's open, and you can cut and paste from it and use it in your reports and make reference to it all over the place. The only thing that we really require is that you acknowledge it and you write something in the footnote of the document saying that that particular piece of evidence has come from SAICE's Infrastructure Report Card 2022. Sorry, I'm just getting another swig here. The IRC distinguishes between economic infrastructure and social infrastructure. So now the definition for economic infrastructure is that which makes business activity possible and includes sectors like bulk transport, communication, and energy supply. And then you get the social infrastructure, which is that which meets the basic needs like water supply, drinking water, sanitation, hospitals, schools, public transport. So 2 very different aspects of infrastructure. Okay, so in this country, there is a triple challenge when it comes to the preservation of our public infrastructure. And firstly, we don't invest enough. We need to increase the investment in both economic and social infrastructure from the 13.7% recorded of GDP in 2020 to at least in line with the development, what's it called? The public initiative, the 2030 public development initiative. I can't remember its words exactly, but that required a 30% investment by the year 2030. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that in 2022, it actually dropped down to 10%, and so we're heading in the wrong direction, ladies and gentlemen. We're not even going in the right direction, so that's a bit of a worry. We need to reduce the habitual underspending of infrastructure budgets by those public service providers who are not held accountable, are prone to service delivery failures, poor governance, weak institutional capacity, and instability. Not spending the budget allocated to them, then it's being returned to Treasury is really a wasted opportunity. I mean, it's sad. They get 100 million rand, to work on their roads, and they only spend 50 because they don't have the capacity, the capability, or the competence to identify and roll out projects to improve the condition of the roads in their municipality, and they end up spending only half of it, and the other half goes back to Treasury. And as you know, when you apply for funds the next year, Treasury say, well, you only spent 50, so you're going to get 50 this year. So it's really a lost opportunity to do something about it. Okay, so the second constraint is that we don't care enough. The most persistent maintenance problem across all IRCs that we've identified in the IRCs are the underfunded, weak public service institutions that lack appropriate technical decision-making skills, and this has led to the neglect of planned new infrastructure and maintenance of existing. It's two things: new infrastructure being planned and the maintenance of existing. So poor end user behavior also impacts on the serviceability of infrastructure through things like theft of materials, vandalism, and the fact is that addressing this damage and replacing the vandalized components or damaged components diverts already limited funds from the planned maintenance budget. And so, of course, you then have less for routine maintenance. There's an increased culture of non-payment for services, which cripples a municipality's ability to fund maintenance. It's very difficult. It's a two-edged sword when you start approaching municipalities or users even to pay for their electricity. And they say, but the electricity is half, it's off half the time. We haven't got a proper service, and you're surprised that we don't want to pay for it. The same with water. You want them to pay for water, but some of these villages have to walk 5 kilometers with a bucket to get water, which is barely drinkable. So it's very difficult to develop a culture of payment for a service that doesn't really deliver. And so it's a bit of a catch-22. Something has to be done. And then we need to introduce revised procurement regulations to minimize the recurring revenue management failures. And I put that in inverted commas, and that means it's a nice way of saying minimizing corruption. Okay, then thirdly, the third constriction really is there are external factors which are outside the control of the state, and those are things like COVID-19 pandemics and climate change impacts which result in excessive flooding, as we've noticed over the last few years, KZN, Western Cape. And of course, these kind of floods, hugely damage and negatively impact the condition of the infrastructure. It obviously affects the roads and the stormwater, and more often than not, the water supply, electricity supply, and the sewage reticulation. So, the floods have a devastating effect, and it's something that's difficult to control. There is obviously arguments saying that if you maintain the stormwater system and maintain the condition of the roads, when a flood comes along, the stormwater system will handle the roads, the stormwater system will handle the floods better. That may well be true, but it's not always so easy to confirm and say is definitely the problem, but it is an impact. There's no question. If you've got better maintenance of your road surfaces and stormwater drainage, then flooding should have less impact. All right, the next slide I wanted to bring up to you is what the purpose of the IRC is. Why does SAICE feel an obligation to do this document every 4 or 5 years? Okay, so we feel that it is to provide an expert opinion on the current condition of the existing infrastructure, together with the impact that condition has on service delivery. Also, to illustrate the trends observed in the condition of the infrastructure, the maintenance expenditure and availability of skills observed since the first IRC in 2006, right up to the fourth one in 2022. It's also to provide a common sense text for the role of the owner and the user. It's written in a language that can be read by Mr. Public. It is not a particularly technical document, and it really describes the roles of the owners of the owners and the users, and it clearly defines what the problems are and where the grades of increase and decrease and the reasons for them and all of that kind of thing. It is not a technical document, so it's designed to be read by people in the public sector, people in the street, whatever. It's also to highlight the factors that led directly to the infrastructure being in the condition that it's in, and also to provide a basis with decision makers on possible solutions. Okay, the value of the infrastructure card lies in its ability to inform and influence macro level planning. It is not a document that goes deep. Remember, it's a snapshot document on the overall condition, the current condition of infrastructure. It doesn't propose solutions. It looks and focuses on the analysis of the existing condition of infrastructure and why it's in the condition it's in, as I mentioned. So it can be used as a macro level planning document to sort of look at where areas are most in need of attention. It's quite difficult to put a budget together out of this thing. That's not the intention of the document. It doesn't go into nearly enough detail. It really helps the decision makers understand where the big problems are, where the macro level planning needs to happen. Obviously, you know, at that point, you appoint a team of professionals and you'll start looking at the costs and the implementation. It's also to lobby. It can be used as well by the decision makers to lobby for infrastructure funding. You know, one would argue that they use the IRC to go to Treasury and say, look, you know, the document has identified this particular infrastructure in need of urgent support, and we have now calculated that the funding we need is so many millions, and we are putting an application in for it. So that's its value. And then also the big thing is to stimulate the debate on the condition of the infrastructure and the effect that it has on the quality of life and on the economy. And finally, it also is to highlight the actions that we believe are necessary to improve the condition of the nation's infrastructure and hence the quality and reliability of service delivery. Okay, so in the infrastructure report card, we addressed 14 sectors. And I won't read them out to you. You can see them there. But there was a growth in subsectors. You can see that the depth to which the document has gone. You know, in 2006, we had 21 subsectors. And in 2022, we had 32 subsectors. But if you look at the overall general sectors, there were 3 new sectors: pipelines, ICT, and fire. So it has grown over the years. We've gone into more depth and looked into more sectors. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the grading system. Okay, so the scorecard, it's a bit like a school thing. It's based on a simple 5-point scale ranging from A, which is defined as world class, that is comparable to the best internationally in every respect. Then B is fit for the future, in good condition and properly maintained. C is satisfactory for now. The condition is acceptable, although it is stressed at peak periods. D is when it's at risk of failure, and I'm going to focus on this one because sadly a lot of our infrastructure is sitting in a D. So D is at risk of failure, poorly maintained, and not coping with demands. And then sadly E, and we've got infrastructure in E, where it is unfit for purpose, it has failed or is on the verge of failure. Okay, then we have a slight adjustment in each of them. We can go with a B plus or a B minus, C plus minus, D plus minus. Okay, when it's a plus, like a C plus, it means that it's robust within that scale. It's in a C and it's given a C plus, and if there's a sudden increase in demand of that particular infrastructure at that moment, it has the robustness to cope and it won't let you down. It'll keep going. But if it's fragile, a C minus within that scale, it could be deemed that if there's a sudden increase in demand, that particular aspect of the infrastructure might actually collapse for an interim period, you know, and collapse into a sort of a D. But, you know, as soon as the demand goes away, it would recover back into a C. So just remember that we do have the D pluses and the D minuses, or, you know, A plus and A minus, etc. Okay, but the big point I wanted to make here is that, remember, no single sector of infrastructure operates in isolation. All of them are interconnected. So while we grade sectors separately, there is a tightly woven interdependency between all of these facilities. Okay, so the next 4 graphs I'm going to show you now illustrate the actual gradings that came out in the IRC 2022. All right, is this thing in the way? Do I need to move it somewhere? Okay, I'll leave it up in the corner there. Okay, right, so the snail trail, just to give you a bit of background, this looks at water, sanitation, solid waste. But the point I wanted to make is, you see on these graphs, there's like a snail trail. It looks like a snail started there and pushed its way to the right. So That is where it was in 2006, and that is where it is now in 2022. So in 2006, the condition of water supply dams, bulk water resources was actually a C minus, for example. And now by the time we got to 2022, it's slipped down to a D minus. Okay, so wherever you see this kind of gray smudge ahead or behind, it either means that it's worsened, it's moving to the right, it's worsened since 2006, and there are cases where it's pushed to the left, and you'll see that it has strengthened since 2006. So just so that you understand what this gray smudge means in every circle. Okay. All right, let me carry on then. That's the snail trail. So for water supply, the condition of our bulk water has declined since 2006. The dam safety reports have not been published since 2016, 2017, and therefore at the moment it is unclear whether all our major dams conform to safety regulations or in fact in sound working order. I'm not saying they're going to collapse, but the fact is that nobody really knows what condition they're in. So, you know, it's quite urgent that we start doing dam safety reports and start making any remedial works on our major dams and major water supply resources. So there's been a big drop. You can see there, it went from C minus down to D minus. The quality and reliability of water supply systems continues to decline in small towns and rural areas. You can see that in the rural areas, the water supply is sitting at a D minus, whilst in urban areas it's sitting at a C plus. You will generally find, if you look at all the things going down here, the rural, small towns and rural is always in a lower condition than urban towns and, you know, urban areas and urban collection and things like that. And the reason being basically is that, you know, the rural areas are handled by the district municipalities, and as a consequence, the areas that need repair are more remote, and the district municipalities have less resources to be able to reach those remote areas and do something about maintaining the condition of services in rural areas and small towns. So typically, as with the water supply, you can see that the small towns is in a worse condition than in the urban areas. In 2022, the Department of Water and Sanitation rated 34% of all water supply systems as being at risk of failure. So that's obviously, that 34% is sitting here. All right. Okay, sanitation and wastewater. Couple of points to note here. The access to flush toilets and on-site sanitation has increased from 61.7% of households in 2002 to 84.1% in 2021, which is positive. Clearly, again, it's happening mostly in the urban areas. However, the standard sanitation systems are generally worse in small towns and rural areas, exactly as I've just said. Okay, again, worse off in the rural areas. There's been a significant approval and access to on-site sanitation in urban areas. The quality of wastewater treatment is declining quite significantly in a lot of the rural areas, and I draw your attention to Hammanskraal and the Rooival wastewater treatment works that happened about a year ago, I suppose, and I don't know, 10 people died of cholera, and it was a huge disaster, and that was because of planned maintenance and renewal of the Rooival water treatment works didn't happen, and it was discharging raw sewage into the local streams where the same people in Hammanskraal were drinking water from. Okay, solid waste. There's been a reduction in the provision of refuse collection services in the metropolitan areas. You can see a huge drop in the refuse collection in metropolitan areas and the larger urban areas, whilst the rural areas and the smaller municipal areas have experienced a large increase in indiscriminate pumping. So in fact, you can see they've also dropped. So there's been a huge drop in anything to do with solid waste connection now. All right, let me move on to the next one, which is roads. Okay, so Sunroll. Sunroll's got a strong maintenance and expansion program, competent management, formalized renewal programs, and in fact, they really run their operation on excellent global standards. So you can see that, in fact, in 2006, Sunrail was sitting at a C, which is, fit for now kind of thing, but they brought themselves, right up to a B plus, almost an A, which is, getting to the point where it's properly fit for the future and nearing world class. But that's pretty much where the story ends. Okay, for most paved and local authorities roads, the repairs are typically reactive, namely fixing potholes rather than conducting regular preventative maintenance. So that puts the paved roads there. You can see the paved metro roads has deteriorated a lot. And then the provincial and municipal gravel roads. That's there and over there. Okay, I'm not sure. Does this thing get in the way? I don't know if it does. Okay, but that's the gravel roads. And they constitute nearly 80% of the country's road network, but a few of them are in a satisfactory condition due to the lack of capacity and insufficient funding. Airports company pay close attention to their infrastructure in order to comply with the requirements and regulatory authorities internationally. But however, the impact of COVID on their revenue streams, as you can imagine, all flights stopped, resulted in the deferral of some maintenance and expansion work as the focus was shifted really just to safety and efficiency, just to keep themselves going. So there was a drop, but I think the fact is that it's still fit for the future. And I dare say now that flights are resuming, they will start doing some more expansion work and proper maintenance. Okay, oops, sorry. Rail, Gautrain, that's the one at the front here. As you can see, it's a world class, grade A. It's dropped slightly due to a few minor geometric track challenges, but they're working on them, so they'll get that right in no time at all. The condition of the iron ore and coal line is good. It has deteriorated primarily due to the management capacity shortcomings, maintenance practice deterioration, aging signal infrastructure, and vandalism and theft. Okay, but having said that, whilst those ore lines and coal lines are in a good nick, the harbors where the ore and coal are distributed, as you've been reading in the news lately, not so good. So, there is still a whole logistical problem of getting the ore and coal, from the mines down to the ships. So the lines might be working, but then there's a problem with the ships. General freight, that's over here. You can see it's okay for now. It's coming up to a C minus, getting a little bit fragile there. It's in a fair condition, and this is despite significant deterioration due to poor maintenance service practices and the ongoing need to repair stolen or vandalized equipment. Big issue here is, though, with general freight, is that it's an unreliable service, as we've all read in the newspapers. And what actually is happening now is freight is being diverted to road, and there are just endless convoys of trucks on the road. I mean, I was in Townshill in Pietermaritzburg recently, and it was crazy. It was just trucks, nose to tail, 24/7, coming down from Johannesburg through to Durban. And you can imagine what damage that is doing to the SANRAL roads. So the roads are being used for a reason that they were not designed, for a purpose that they were not designed. And the freight, which is a much cheaper way of traveling, is just not reliable enough. So we really need to do something about getting that back in action. The branch lines in South Africa are in a very poor condition, and only a small percentage are actually operational. So a lot of them are not operational. Look at the drop between 2006 to 2022. I mean, it was kind of working, okay, at risk of failure, but it now totally failed. And then the condition of the Metro and Prasa commuter rail network is again very poor. Many mainline passenger services collapsed and are now almost non-existent. I'll show you some graphs later about that. Prasa does have a strategy. I mean, I've been in touch with Prasa a lot, And they do have a strategy to remedy their service, but it's slow steps, and it's going to take a while to get there. So I know they're doing quite a bit of work in Pretoria, and they're doing a bit of work in Cape Town, but there's a long way. Look at that. It used to be actually a C minus, you know, which was okay for now, and it's basically now non-existent, failed. Okay, then we come to ports. Okay, ports is a slightly happier story, except when you look at ports like at Richards Bay Coal Terminal, but the other ports, okay, there's Transnet owns 9 commercial ports, and they have been well developed and they're well managed. They've got good standards and regulations, and they do proper infrastructure condition assessments. And so they've maintained them. There's not huge growth, but there's a bit of improvement. You can see it went from a C minus up to a B minus, so there is an improvement. Fishing ports, there's 12 proclaimed fishing harbors in South Africa, and they had a major refurbishment over the years since 2006 to 2022. And in fact, right now, they're in generally a fair condition. They are operating properly, the fishing ports. So there's been quite a nice change in performance of the fishing ports to date. Pipelines. Okay, so the pipelines, as we know, are sort of owned. The pipeline owners know full well that the service interruptions impacts directly on their revenue. Pipelines aren't working. You can't convey anything by pipeline, no revenue. So they ensure that their pipelines are inspected and maintained and rigorously repaired, you know, as far as they can. Obviously, a large proportion of their pipelines are underground, so there are some challenges, but they do maintain them as rigorously as they can, and they keep that service running. All right, now the next one is the favorite one for everybody, and that's electricity. Let me just see what's hiding behind this thing. I can't remember. Okay, there's nothing there. All right, so electricity. Yeah, we all know the current generation situation with Eskom's 15 coal-fired power stations. Some of them are more than 55 years old and have been operated without sufficient maintenance and refurbishment. And, you know, we're obviously seeing the effects of that now. As I said, it's amazing how suddenly we have electricity leading up to the elections, but I can tell you that there's a good chunk of it being generated by diesel, and those poor generators are being worked to destruction. So at some point, we will feel the impact of what's going on now. I think the ANC government are just praying and hoping that it keeps going until the 29th of May. Okay, so our not-so-new Minister of Electricity, Ramaphosa, he presented a short, medium, and long-term plan to mitigate energy risks when he first came on board. I'm a little bit out of date as to just how far he's got with them. The short term was the completion of 2 hybrid projects, supposedly coming online soon, and that was going to give us 274 megawatts. Then he also had power purchasing agreements with Mozambique, and I presume they've been concluded up to now, and that was going to get us 1,000 megawatts. And then the medium term was to engage with technical experts to assess the 4 older power stations with low energy availability factors, EAF. And that was Matla, Majuba, Kendall, and Creel. The predicted movements should generate another 1,000 megawatts. But I was quite concerned that the Treasury supply chain processes would delay the awards of these improvement contracts, and we've yet to see how that pans out. Also, there was a plan to take 2 old power stations out of mothballs and generate hopefully another 140 megawatts. And then Ramaphosa was going to introduce what he referred to as the load shedding reduction program. And this was a campaign to instill a culture of electricity savings by the users. And if the users behave themselves and switch off lights and switch off geysers and do what they need to do to save electricity as much as usual, as much as possible rather, that could give us anything up to about 750 megawatts. I haven't really seen a huge campaign going on, quite honestly, and I'm not sure if there's any savings being affected so far to date. Okay, so that's enough about the generation. On the Eskom transmission network, you can see it sitting in a B there. So that it seems good, actually, got better. It's remained steady over the last decade, but now it needs to be expanded to cater for future growth. And there are programs and procurement programs within the supply chain, to basically extend the transmission network. So there's a lot of work to be done there too. So, whilst what we've got is working, it's not enough. During the research for the IRC, we struggled to get information on the municipal distribution. This is where Eskom distributes or supplies power to the municipality, who then distribute it to within their municipality. And as we know, very often the municipalities don't collect revenue, and the municipalities owe the Eskom absolutely millions and millions of rands. So we're not sure where that's changed, and so we assume that it's in the same condition that it was in 2017 when we did it, and we gave it a grade of a D. Okay, for hospitals and clinics, the data on the condition of the health infrastructure was really difficult to maintain. We really went in touch with every single department of health. We talked to the hospitals, and they were all very cagey about it. So we actually had to base the information on the public domain as it appears, as it appears on the internet, and obviously through press releases, which is not always, unbiased. Obviously, the press will always talk bad about the facilities. But based on that, it appears that most provincial health departments and their associated public works departments do not place nearly enough emphasis on maintenance. We've all been reading that the condition of the government hospitals and clinics, not so much the clinics, but the hospitals, has deteriorated hugely. Where they're not equipped, the lifts don't work, the operating theatres don't work, the generators don't work. The whole thing is a bit of a shambles right now. And I can just tell you that after we released this report, the Department of Health were really angry with us, and they contacted us within seconds. And we said to them, well, where were you when we tried to contact you when we were trying to get the information? If you feel that we've been harsh on the performance of your hospitals and clinics, then you would have been able to tell us at the point at which we asked you. And they said, no, we never asked. And I said, no, that's nonsense. And I have a whole trail of emails, etc., and phone calls and things, and no response. So we based it on what was in the public domain. But anyway, the net result of that is actually we now have a relationship with the Department of Health, and hopefully they will give us better, more accurate information that doesn't upset them so much, but at the same time does reflect the situation as it is. On education, that's the universities' TVETs. On higher education, the impact on higher education, there was an impact with COVID-19. It delayed a lot of infrastructure maintenance and expansion programs, but there was only a minor deterioration. You can see the universities and the TVET colleges. Universities are really, are in a fit condition, and the TVETs, whilst not in as good a condition, are actually at a D+. So they're at risk of failure, but robust, so they are going okay. The same can't quite be said for public schools. Some progress has been made on improving school facilities in many rural areas, but they are not well maintained, and they're out of order. The reliability of water and electricity and sewerage in these schools remains poor. You can imagine too, we didn't separate urban schools and rural schools. Had we separated urban schools and rural schools, the urban schools would have been somewhere over here, and like the other ones that you saw before, the rural schools would have been somewhere over there. But in this report, we looked at the schools collectively, and so they've sort of landed somewhere in the middle, and the condition of them has deteriorated a little bit, but not dramatically so. Okay, ICT is another one of these sort of owner-operated facilities. The ICT owners are dependent on their income stream, and therefore they have every incentive in the world to strive for it to be functioning at all times. And this condition is supported by high maintenance standards and a continual cycle of investment. I mean, you can see what happens with ICT in this country. We've got a good ICT. All right, so that's basically the gradings of the sectors. So I'm just going to go to the next slide, which looks at it overall. So in 2016, the first IRC over here we gave South Africa's overall grade a D plus, which is at risk of failure, but you know, kind of robust. And it was based on an already apparent lack of necessary maintenance. But in the next IRC 2011, we noted that there were large investments in new infrastructure leading up to the 2010 Soccer World Cup. I mean, the older ones like me will remember what it was like in 8, 9, 10. This country was great. Unemployment was low. Buildings and roads and sewage treatment plants and rail lines and everything was all happening. It was really wonderful. And examples were the Gautrain, the GFIP, numerous municipal service networks. And in fact, that reflected overall. Obviously, you know, rural schools and rural sanitation probably didn't change that much. But when you look at the aggregate, and I'll discuss that aggregate later, it impacted on the overall average, the aggregate. And so we elevated the overall grade to a C minus. So you can see they're sitting at C minus 2011. But then when we did the next infrastructure report card in 2017, it became evident that the poor attitude to maintenance had resumed again. And we reflected this in the downturn of the grade back to a D plus. So we were back to 2006 levels there to there. But that's not the worst. Now with the 2022 infrastructure report card, the overall grade for South Africa's infrastructure declined even further to a D, which means it's now solidly in the risk of failure. So that indicates the overall, let me just go through this now. The overall grade of a D indicates that South Africa's existing infrastructure, when taken in aggregate, and I need to highlight that word, when taken in aggregate, is unsatisfactory and generally at risk of failing to serve its purpose. And this is the lowest grade yet, which is a concern. But the word aggregate means the average of all the sectors and subsectors, ranging from those pockets of excellence, the Gautrains on the one side, to the unfit for purposes, those are the gravel roads, the sewer, the rural sewer, the rural sanitation, the rural water, rural schools, etc. So one has to look at an aggregate. Okay, and one must remember that the individual gradings and the aggregated grading can be subjective. And SAICE engaged a moderation group of technical and external experts, people that are not within SAICE. We spoke to experts that are outside SAICE to review the data and the preliminary gradings by our researchers and reach an agreement on what was finally published. Okay, so it's a very subjective document. It's a snapshot of what it is at the point of 2022. And as I say, when you start looking at the overall grade, it becomes a little fuzzy. It doesn't sort of separate, you know, between pockets of excellence and areas of complete failure. You have to read deeper into the document, like I've done with a summary before that, to understand how we got to this. Okay. All right, so there were 3 critical matters of importance that need our attention. These things were sort of identified and highlighted, and in fact, they've been there basically since the beginning of the infrastructure report card process with SAICE in 2006. Okay, so firstly, people and relationships. Namely, we need to get sufficient numbers of the appropriate skills in the right places. And I'll talk more about this one later, because from a SAICE point of view, this is the crunch. Getting the right people with the right skills in the right places. And secondly, institutional robustness. Namely, we need to deliver mandates, institute real accountability, introduce effective policies and governance systems. And then thirdly, we need better data and information on the age, condition, and performance of the current assets, the backlogs and future needs. Namely, it goes without saying, we need a formalized asset management protocol, which is not happening at the moment. You know, how can you plan infrastructure maintenance in a municipality if you have no idea what you have or what condition it's in? And that is the case when you speak to most municipalities. They don't even know what condition it's in. They don't know when it's meant to be fixed, when it's meant to be maintained, and they don't even know what they've got. So you really have to have proper asset management, and those are things that they are aware of it. It's a case of implementing. Okay, so this graph to me is an interesting graph. This is now talking about getting the right people in the right place at the right time kind of thing. In 2007, Alison Lawless, and I'm sure most of you know Alison Lawless, she was the founding director of SAICE Professional Development Projects. She studied the profile of civil engineering expertise and local government. And the trends in civil engineering capacity are illustrated clearly here. Okay, there's been a displacement of the older, experienced, professionally registered practitioners between the ages of 45 and 60. You can see it. Look what happened in 2015. You had quite a nice resource of senior experienced engineers, technologists, and technicians. That's, oops, sorry, that's red, yellow, blue. In 2015, you can see what's happening. There's a significant depletion in all three of those engineers, technologists, technicians. And then by the time we get to 2020, and this survey was done by LGCTA, it wasn't even done by Alison Lawless, but it really doesn't contradict what we're seeing here. It actually reinforces it. So by the time we get to 2020, there are no engineers left, a smattering of technologists and technicians. And look what's happened. You've got a huge influx of graduate technologists and technicians, yellow and blue. Massive influx. Okay, but the takeaway here is kind of goes without saying. You can see that those experienced practitioners have been replaced by the younger, less experienced technologists and technicians, and that has left an imbalance in the profile of skill sets that are required for effective service delivery. And secondly, the leaving of the senior experienced practitioners means that the younger incoming graduates do not have anyone in the workplace to provide a structured mentorship program, which is essential to develop their skills in service delivery and, more importantly, to guide their holistic careers towards professional registrations. You know, I can't say how many times, as the president last year, I went to municipalities and there were a whole bunch of youngsters that came to the presentation that I made, and it actually included this graph. And I would say to the youngsters, you know, who's mentoring you? You know, who's teaching you your job? You know, are you taking into account the X outcomes? Are you, making sure you're getting experience and filling in your TERs? And they looked at me blankly. They said, there's nobody here. You know, I mean, it's absolutely pathetic. These are district municipalities that are trying to run themselves on graduates, technicians and technologists who are not even registered and nowhere near registered. And what's the end result of that? They leave. They get so frustrated that they realize eventually, and hopefully sooner than later, that they are not going to get the experience that they need here and actually get themselves professionally registered, and their careers will just die a natural death. So they have to do something. And sadly, what they do is they leave the municipality. Okay, so the net effect of the skills deficit I referred to here, this skills deficit, this imbalance of skills, is that there's no long-term planning being carried out, but instead there are only knee-jerk reactions to demands from the councillors. There's no routine maintenance work being scheduled, but instead they wait for call-outs, complaints, or invitations to community meetings, and there are no meaningful budgets being planned, but instead they accept and make do with whatever budget is allocated to them. And as I mentioned earlier, they don't even spend those budgets. Okay. Oh, sorry, missed it. So really, the aim here, and this is the point that I make when I go and see these municipalities and the public sector, is that they must become an employer of choice. It must be a place where young graduates appreciate that they will be looked after there, and they will be encouraged, and they will be guided, and and they will become experienced professionals who are able to actually register themselves. That's what an employer of choice means. Okay. But what we've been doing in the interim, at least, to try and replace those that deficit of seniors, is to actually encourage them to engage more senior experienced professionals. And we've got plenty of them in this country, retired municipal engineers who've been retired and are looking for work and are more than happy to come back and mentor. So we're not actually asking the municipalities to to re-employ them. I mean, some of them are over 65, whatever it might be, but to take them in on a contract basis and just provide the mentorship and help, with the driving and the establishment of long and short-term programs, and to manage the building control and to handle the emergencies, and to also manage designs and contracts and develop systems and processes. But their job whilst they're there is clearly the most important thing, is to mentor the young graduates to be able to do the same. Let me add a factor here too. When we go to the municipalities and offer this service of mentorship, we're not even asking the municipalities to put money into it. SAICE PDP has access to LGCTA funding. So they actually use their allocation of LGCTA funding to remunerate those mentors to actually go and do the things that I've just described. So in fact, when we speak to the municipalities, we're saying to the municipalities, please, we're not asking you to find budget. Don't come and say to me, you haven't got the money. That's not the issue. What you've got to give me is your young graduates' names. All you've got to do is give us the names, allow us to allocate mentors to them, and let us develop their skills and get them to the point of registration, and try and develop that employer of choice scenario, so that these trained and professional graduates that we've now developed become the next generation and train the next young incoming cohort of graduates. That's the way it's going to work. If you don't do that, it can't work. And I sort of rounded this up by saying the skills shortage and capacity issues within the public sector can only sustainably be addressed by establishing a professional engineering corps within the public sector via a strategy which first acknowledges the problem and secondly commits to remedying it. Okay, I've got a few slides now that show you what happens when there's no institutional robustness. All of these slides that I'm about to show you now, there's 6 of them, are in the infrastructure report card, and so you'll see them when you go through it. This one is the user's perception of road conditions from the National Household Travel Surveys carried out in 2013 and 2020 by province. That's 2013 and 2020. And you can see actually that there was a reduction. This is 2020, this is 2013. In all provinces, for the most part, there was actually a reduction, except for Free State, Northwest Province, and Limpopo Province, where there was an increase. Okay, so not altogether bad news. That is the perception of road conditions between 2013 and 2020. This next one is the percentage of households that reported water interruptions by metropolitan area in 2020. So you can see ones like Nelson Mandela Bay, Buffalo, eThekwini, Swanee, they are somewhat higher. And then the other ones, this is Mangaung, average of the metros, Ekurhuleni, City of Joburg, Cape Town, generally less. So that was the report of interruptions in 2020. Okay, this next one is the percentage of households that have access to improved sanitation by metropolitan area in 2020. So again, you can see that in the metropolitan areas, the percentage of access to improved sanitation is actually not bad. It's actually quite impressive. Nelson Mandela Bay is particularly high, and even eThekwini is sitting at 82. Average of the metros is 89.4. Remembering what I said about rural areas, so this is the urban areas. Okay, this is where it starts getting interesting. This is a graph that shows the relationship between freight rail and passenger rail from 1950 to 2020. So you can see freight rail has been steadily increasing, except in the last while, where the freight services now are starting to flounder. We're back at levels of around 2004, 2006. And you can see the passenger rail has dropped off to virtually nothing. Okay, and that was what I mentioned. that's Prasa and Metro that are really almost in a failed condition. All right, this is the energy reliability factor. This is the actual efficiency, if that's right, energy availability factor of power stations, basically going back from 2006 to 2021. And you can see it's at an all-time low. It's running on average with all its coal-fired power stations at around 62%, probably lower now. All right, and this is load shedding, finally load shedding, and that's only from 2015 to 2022. I haven't added the figures because that's when this IRC was published, but you can imagine where we are with 2023 and so far with 2024. It's probably right off the scale here. You know, it'll be sitting up here somewhere, and so the situation has got a lot worse. All right, so let me get back into the meat of this thing. Okay, so there are some reasons for optimism. You know, this presentation up to now has been doom and gloom, and half my delegates usually go off somewhere and slit their wrists, and hopefully none of you have done that yet. There are some reasons for optimism, and I think one has to be positive. One's got to think of that. You know, we can turn this ship around. I mean, there's no doubt about it. With proper governance and proper management and proper competence and proper training, you know, it's not that big a job. Okay, so the centers of excellence, as you saw in my graphs, is AXA, Gautrain, Sunrail, the transmission networks, heavy haul lines, ICT, oil, gas, and the fishing harbors. And there's also some professionalism in the public sector. There are a few municipalities with clean audits, which, you know, should be used as an example to those municipalities that don't have clean audits. And we've had meetings with MISA, that's the Municipal Infrastructure Support Agent, and they do just that. They target the district municipalities, which are generally the worst, and they try and provide on-site training to, you know, in line with those municipalities that have clean audits, to try and get them to develop proper processes and protocols and manage their budgets and their maintenance more effectively. And then the other thing is the Department of Water and Sanitation has reintroduced the blue drop and green drop reports, and that's something that hadn't happened for many years. And these reports, which we used in our 2022 infrastructure report card, those reports are very, very detailed, very capable, and actually, you know, honestly good reading. And they do give a real honest picture on the condition of water and sanitation, you know, at urban and rural and bulk in South Africa. And it was by far the best source of information that we had when we prepared this infrastructure report card. So in fact, we're very pleased with the output of the water and sanitation sections of our report card because we had such good information. Okay, there are also new policy underpinnings for life cycle costing, maintenance, budgeting, and asset management. So there are policies in place. These things are being developed by Treasury, and they are there, and they are aware of them. You know, the trick, of course, is to actually implement them and put them in place and bring them into legislation. There's also the National Framework towards the Professionalization of the Public Sector that was published by the School of Government in October 2022. Cyril Ramaphosa made reference to this very document in his SONA last year, not this one, the one last year. So they are very aware that they have got to start professionalizing the public sector, and the cadre system just doesn't work. It really doesn't. And, you know, again, they are aware of these things. It's a case of putting the energy into implementing them. And then finally, there's also a Government Gazette 45181 on municipal staff competence profiles, and that was issued in September 2021. So these documents are there. The government are aware of it. They're writing these documents, but it's the application and putting them into legislation and enforcing them by law, literally, that will make things improve. And these are the sort of changes that need to happen. All right, I think I've sort of got to the end of that part of my presentation. And what I'm going to speak about now is over a year and a half ago, when I did my presidential mega address, that's Make Engineering Great, mega address, I undertook to do two things during my presidential year. So I'm going to go through a little bit what I achieved in relation to the infrastructure report card. I'm not going to go into the other things that I want to do, but how it related to the infrastructure report card. So a year ago, when I made my presentation, I firstly said I was going to use the infrastructure report card as leverage to target audiences with the decision makers, highlighting the relevance and the role of the senior civil engineering professionals in the provision and maintenance of infrastructure, and more importantly, in the mentorship of young graduates towards professional registration. And then secondly, I was going to reinforce SAICE as the relevant go-to place. Sorry, I just lost my spot. Hang on. I was going to reinforce SAICE as the relevant go-to place for both decision makers and public media for advice, consultation, commentary, and opinion on civil infrastructure service provision and policy making matters. So those are the two things I kind of promised I would endeavor to do. I mean, it's a tall order. I mean, one guy running around, is not going to achieve that. But I have to say, with the support of National Office and my president-elect, we actually made some progress. So on the first count, I met with all of these public service organizations. I've listed them there. I'm not going to go through them. You can just read them as you're going along. And we focused primarily on the assistance from SAICE and SAICE PDP with engineering capacity and mentorship. And I have to say that in every one of these meetings, there was always an awareness. The person that we were speaking to in public sector was aware of the issues which negatively impacted on infrastructure service delivery. It's not like they don't know what's going on. They know exactly what's going on. They know they have shortages of capacity. They know they don't have mentorship programs. They know that they don't have the budgets. They don't have the competence or the capability. They actually do know it. And so, having said that, there was a willingness to participate in the SAICE PDP program using LGC to funding. And since then, SAICE PDP, after every time I meet a municipality, I give contact details to SAICE PDP, and they go forward and contact the HR department in that particular municipality, and they get given names of graduates, and they get assigned mentors, and they have been enrolled on the road to registration. So we've had some success there. I mean, early days. I mean, it takes time to do this. But I believe, we've made headway with offers to assist with the recruitment. We've also, sorry, that's another one. We've also made headway with our office to assist with the recruitment of senior engineering practitioners. That's what I mentioned, on a sort of a secondment basis. I mean, these guys are generally retired municipal engineers. They certainly are experts, and nobody's asking them to get appointed as full-time people. They come in on a contract basis, and they mentor, but they also strengthen the capacity and also provide that career development. I remain eternally optimistic that the public sector can and will rise above the current poor level of professionalization. The lack of capacitation, incompetence, and corruption, together with private sector participation, they will do what is necessary to rectify our infrastructure. There's no doubt in my mind that a positive change to the relevance or key value of our engineering professionals and SAICE is a principal key to the proper capacitation of the public sector. Okay, so on the second count, this was making SAICE the go-to place. On the second count, the SAICE Executive Board approved the establishment of a working group tasked with embedding the research and publication of future IRCs and deep dive bulletins into the strategy of the institution. And this will ensure that our goal of maintaining our relevance, the relevance of the institution and the relevance of the civil engineering professional will be achieved. Okay, so That working group is listed there. Okay, you can see that. Okay, so the 2022 IRC research team, that was the one that I project managed, and the efforts of this working group, the one on the slide before, have made significant progress in developing relationships with the public sector and state-owned companies. They have met so far already with all of these organizations and started to develop those relationships, which is all important for getting the information and actually having discussions with them and offering them assistance if they need it. And some of them are asking for assistance. They're asking for assistance. It's really coming down to the mentoring and capacitation. You know, that's what SAICE can do. You know, we're not consultants. We're not going to go and build things, but we are experts in our fields, and we can provide assistance in the prioritization of projects and the maintenance of projects, the planning for the maintenance and planning for renewal, and obviously provide the resources to help them get there. Okay, but we have a long way to go. I'm not kidding myself, but I am still confident that we can get there. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, I close off by saying that it goes without saying that the proper capacitation of the public sector will lead to the improvement of infrastructure in South Africa, which will best serve the public interest. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now. I hope you're all there. Went very quiet. Everybody asleep. Norman, Tiffany.
Are we here, Stephen? Thank you very much.
You sort of feel that you're talking to yourself after one.
No. We've been
listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Listening.
It took me I went for about an hour. Sorry, so that was about what we said.
Oh, that's lovely. There's a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
One says, good morning. Not sure if I missed it, but where are the government and SAPS office buildings covered? Prisons and courts of law buildings.
Okay, yes. Okay, that's a sector we didn't cover, the prisons. And you know, we had limited resources when we did this thing, but we didn't cover, you know, the government assets, all the buildings, you know, that they've got, other than the hospitals and the schools. And when I spoke about the schools and the hospitals, we don't speak about the doctoring and the teaching and the nursing and whatever it is. We're speaking about the buildings.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's about. And so we didn't have the resources to get to the prisons and obviously the hundreds or thousands of other government buildings in South Africa, which we know. I mean, look what's happening in Johannesburg. The municipal and government buildings are in a shocking state. You know, fires are breaking out. They haven't been maintained. There's no services there. Totally unsafe. Yeah, so there's that aspect. Sure, absolutely.
And then the second question was from Uwe. He says, comment, reading various internet newsletters, Denmark and New York proactively have constructed stormwater management structures to channel water along routes that may be flooded and drained later, including sport fields and others where no permanent damage was likely to occur.
Yeah.
Almost like containment dams and those sort of things.
These are attenuation ponds. You use sports fields as an attenuation pond. You know, there are ways to deal with it. Of course there are. And people that specialize in stormwater management and control, I hope, are looking at it in KZN and Western Cape when they come to do the repairs, so that when we get another rainstorm like that, we don't just wash all that good work away, you know, and make sure that that's happening. You know, obviously, you know, if you get 100-year flood, there's not much you're going to do to resist that. You know, you're still going to get a lot of damage. But sure, you don't need to get that much damage every single time it rains.
Yeah. And then a comment from Anonymous. He says, in closing, you should add that infrastructure is also a key economic driver. With our unemployment rate, infrastructure development will go a long way to alleviate this problem as well. And I mean, the one thing we know about infrastructure is we can make use of a lot of unskilled and semi-skilled people.
Absolutely.
In the provision of infrastructure.
Look, every time they had one of these infrastructure symposiums, they've just had one recently, and they've written a book called, I can't remember what it's called, I've got it now, I'll have to go and look for it, but it identifies 200 low-hanging fruit, but we've done this every time. Norman, I don't have to tell you, every time we do this, we have one of these symposiums, we all stand up and identify 200 big projects, low-hanging fruit, and they're going to go. They're going to go, and they don't, and it's so frustrating. It's really that level of incompetence, but also it's a consequence of such complicated supply chain management procurement processes. You all remember the FIDPIM and the SIDPIM and all the other, and the IDMS and all of these things, which, Ron Waterman had a lot to do with them. They're very complicated. And as a consequence of that complication, a lot of people, instead of making a decision to identify a project and roll it out, they get a little bit intimidated by the complexity of the process and the fear that if they make a decision, it's the wrong one and they could lose their jobs. So they make no decisions, and because it's safer that way, you can't go anywhere. And that's the problem. But when you speak to Treasury, and we have, they said, yes, but it has to be complicated to attenuate the corruption, the mismanagement. So, you need a fine balance. It has to be sophisticated enough to control the corruption, but not so sophisticated that, you have to have a PhD to understand it. So anyway, that's something that we do speak to Treasury about. We're speaking to Treasury a lot about PPPs.
Yeah.
And they've got a whole division inside Treasury now, specializing in PPP projects, and they're using experts. We've got a couple of guys, John Samuels and Werner Dreyer, who are both PPP experts, and they are assisting Treasury. So I believe that they are talking to the right people and trying to develop the right processes and implementing PPP projects. Of course, these projects have to be bankable, and and that is always a challenge, especially if if it's like a toll road or something and people don't pay the tolls. They're not always as bankable as they would appear on paper anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Tiffany, anything from your side?
Well, I see we have a raised hand, so perhaps if anyone does have questions, I can allow them to speak. So, Mike, I see your hand is raised, so I will allow you to speak. And then if there's anyone else who may have questions, please feel free to do so.
Hi, Steve. Mark Riverella. Stephen, I'm a strong proponent of SIPTM. The reason is that it was based on ISO best practices. In fact, the procurement methodologies of SIPTM are even implemented in Russia. So it is worldwide best practice. Not that, probably
Russia,
not
if you
that.
don't do it properly, you get sent to Siberia.
Yeah, probably not that successfully. But the problem we have in South Africa is that at political level, people bury their head in the sand. So if they don't look at a problem, they think that the problem goes away. Absolutely. And in fact, all it does, it just gets worse. Every day, it just gets worse. And without making political statements, the only province that has a plan is the Western Cape. And the only government department that has a plan is the Department of Water Affairs and Sanitation.
Yeah.
Under Senzo and Chunu, they really have done a lot. With Sean Phillips, they've tackled the problems and they've head on and they've admitted where the shortcomings were and they have a plan to solve them. Whereas if I look at public works, I mean, they're just taking pot shots in the dark. And just one concern add to the professionalization of the civil service. What lacks is the middle 40s, 50s. And as Alison Lawless often says if you want a person with 10 years of experience, it takes 10 years to get there.
Yes, of
You
course.
can't.
Yeah, I know.
And so what I found is that there are a huge number of junior engineers that are being appointed with absolutely no experience whatsoever. And
Right.
and you know, you face these people and you don't really know what to say, because you are like really walking on broken glass. On the one hand, you want to tell them, look, sorry, but you know what you are wanting to do is really not going to work, because I've done it before and I know that it doesn't work. So I'm not sure how they're going to overcome that problem. But you know, in the old days, you used to second a junior or a senior to a junior, whether it was a retired engineer or whether it was a semi-retired engineer who didn't really have any prospects of further career path. Used to second that to a junior who maybe had prospects of a career path and let them assist in the development. It's not happening at the moment. It's not happening with contractors. It's not happening with civil service staff. It's just not happening, and that's where the disasters are. And I mean, Alison has done amazing work, you know, with the numbers and needs, and it's just, you know, in file 13, waiting for the next elections.
I know. Look, well, we can only hope that, you know, that we get, you know, a competent governance. I still believe it's not too late to turn all of this around. I mean, the infrastructure is not far, you know, beyond repair. It just needs that attention, and it needs the investment, and it needs the capability. And I believe that it can happen. But it's a training process. It really is. It's a continual training process. Yeah, but they have to be willing. You know, it's got to be willingly received and acknowledge the problem. Well, anyway, we can talk about this forever, Mike. Yeah.
No, sure. Yeah, but there are, as you say, there are green shoots, and I think Dwarf is probably the greenest of the lot.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from anybody? All right.
All right. Yeah, I don't see any other
Well, thank you very
questions
much
coming up
for listening to me. I appreciate it. It's as I say, just to close off, the working group that I spoke of, which is made up of the president-elect, the president, the immediate past president, and the president before that, the CEO, and the champion of advocacy, you know, are working hard at developing relationships. So we're going to make sure that when we do our next infrastructure report card in say 3 years' time, that we will have much better relationships and much more accurate information. And maybe we'll take it a bit further than just being a snapshot of the current condition, and focus a little bit more on what can be done to improve that current condition, or even maybe what steps have been done since the last infrastructure report card to improve that current condition. And then what we also want to do is not just have this infrastructure report card come up once every 5 years, flash in the pan, and we all have a little talk about it for a year or two, like we're doing now, and then it's forgotten about until the next one. This particular working group is going to be involved in writing what we keep calling deep dive bulletins, or, you know, papers, you know, that actually look at a particular aspect. We might just go into Nelson Mandela Bay and actually do an analysis on their gravel roads, and actually, you know, overview that and write a report, you know, on the current condition of their gravel roads, and, you know, what measures are being taken to improve it. We've had long discussions with PRASA, with Fana Marukla, chief engineer there, past president of SAICE, and, you know, he obviously feels strongly that PRASA are doing a lot to remedy the poor state of affairs right now. So I said to him, great, come and talk to us. Let's write a paper. Let's present your strategy. Let the country see what it is what you're going to do in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. So, you know, that's the point of the deep dives. So those sort of deep dive papers, which will obviously be appearing in our magazine, or even in the environment, public media, depending on the nature of the document, that's not too technical. And all of those articles would lead up then to the next infrastructure report card, which would then be a lot more informed because we have those stronger relationships with those municipalities, state-owned companies, and the public sector generally.
Stephen, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. And above all, thank you for your optimism. I hope it's contagious. I really do.
Oh, no, I have to be optimistic. Otherwise, I'm going to go and slit my throat.
Well, don't do it just yet. And thanks to all CASA members for attending the webinar this morning. I hope you found it useful and informative. I know I certainly did. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much.
Is that it? Can I leave now? Can I? Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.